Welcome to Love and Abuse, the show about helping you identify poisonous communication and toxic behavior. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. That's why it's important that you learn to pinpoint manipulative and controlling behavior so that you keep your power and your sanity. I'm your host, Paul Coliani. Welcome back to another episode of Love and Abuse. This is a special episode where I have a guest on. Her name is Stephanie McPhail, and she is the author of the book Being Loved Shouldn't Hurt. And the reason I had Stephanie on today is not only is she a coach in the field of emotional abuse and narcissistic abuse, and she runs a support group and she has retreats and all kinds of things to help victims to not only survive but thrive after an emotionally abusive relationship, is that she went through some pretty tough stuff in a marriage that she was in herself. And after several years of really abusive behavior from her husband, she had enough and she had to do whatever she could to get out of that situation because it was just too dangerous. And she also went through a lot of healing after that. And so whether you want to stay in the relationship that you're in or you want to leave the relationship that you're in, Stephanie's story will probably resonate with you if you're in a similar type of situation. So we had a phone conversation. I want to share it with you now. The connection wasn't the best, so the quality is going to be affected just a little bit. But I wanted to air this for you because it's really good information. Stephanie is a great person who has not only healed through her stuff, but knows how to help you heal through yours too. Here's our conversation right now. I hope you get some value from it. I created Love and Abuse because I noticed the emails I was getting were 90% about my relationship this and he or she is doing this.
Yeah.
And so I was just like, okay, I really need to expand onto that. And plus I created a workbook called the Mean Workbook, but that has really helped people identify if they're in a toxic relationship or not. And so what I like to do with this show is get all the resources I can for everyone. People like yourself that are out there spreading the word to the billions, because I'm only going to reach so far. There's only going to be so many people that want to hear my voice, that want to hear a man's voice, that want to hear my information. And so I prefer bringing in as many resources as I can for the masses, because there are several people out there spreading this information about toxic relationships and unhealthy communication and emotional abuse and narcissistic abuse. And then you get into the psychopathy and socio all that stuff. But they're few and far between. And it surprises me how few there are. So it's nice to see people going out there with their own stories too.
And I can say too, like I literally just spoke to someone yesterday and she had a terrible story of she was sexually abused as a child and she was in a domestic violence situation in her marriage. And I said, same kind of thing is that I know that I'm not going to reach everybody. So the more people that I interview that I can get on, the better chance I can reach more people. So I was like, maybe you should jump on. We should do an interview because there's going to be people that really relate to it. She was not anywhere near healed. She wanted to go into coaching. And I could feel the anger through the messages. And I said, I can't have that on my podcast. I can't have that on my YouTube channel because I'm trying to show from a place of healing, not from a place where there's still all this anger and hurt and fear and all these other things. It's not going to teach the people what I'm trying to teach them. That's
tough. And I think I've talked about that in the past where someone who hasn't fully healed yet trying to spread a message, trying to heal. And there's a lot of people, and I'm not putting anyone down here, there's a lot of people in therapy and counseling that are doing their own healing through counseling others. And I think it can be done, and it takes a special skill to not let your own stuff get inside that. So that's tough, and I'm glad you brought that up because I'm just thinking about it now. One of the subjects I'm reading more and more about is that when you go to therapy, what'll often happen is that the emotional abuser, the narcissist, or whoever it is, the therapist will take their side and will start using their skills in a way that is not helpful to the victim. And so you sounds like you've heard this before.
All the time. I hear it all the time. And they actually recommend that if you do think that you are in a relationship with a sociopath, narcissist, and anything like that where you're fearful for your safety, to not go to therapy with them. They need to go to their own therapy. Because from my personal experience, the therapist actually did not fall into believing anything that he was saying, but the therapist took me to the side and they were scared for my safety. She would say to me, I don't want you to go home. I am scared for you. And then he would come back in and say, see, you're putting her against me. You're only giving your side. And then it would be a week's worth. So in between the sessions, a week's worth of like hell, where he would give me a hard time. The silent treatment, would get angry. And so it was just completely wasting my time and his time, and actually would make things worse. And so they recommend, if you're in a situation with a narcissist, etc., do not even bother with therapy. You will make things worse one way or the other.
Well, that's interesting, because it sounds like your relationship, there was a little bit more danger involved from what you're telling me. So what is your story here? Is this one major relationship? Is this several relationships, or?
Well, I like, when I make a mistake, I like to make it a few times just to make sure. So
the best teachers out there made a lot of mistakes. Okay.
Yeah, the universe showed me, and it was like I needed to get banged in the head a few times before I actually started listening. Okay. But so I spent 15 plus years going from one toxic relationship to another one, and the last big one really being my first marriage. And my husband on our wedding night strangled me. And it actually, he chased me around our honeymoon suite after I spilled water on the bathroom floor, and chased me around telling me he wanted to kill me, that he wished I was dead. He made the worst mistake of his life marrying him. Yes, I had seen lots of red flags beforehand, but I ignored it because I thought at 29 years old that I was getting older, and if I wanted to settle down and have a family, that maybe I was being too picky. And because of my past experience with bad relationships, I thought, well, you know what? Maybe it's my fault. Maybe I'm the one who's making these good guys go bad. And maybe if I just act a little bit differently and do the things that he wants me to do, maybe he's the one who's right and I'm the one who's wrong. So I kind of had set myself up that way. And so when the wedding night happened, and I thought to myself, I can't stay married to this man. I mean, he strangled me on our wedding night. I mean, I struggled and I started to lose the ability to fight back. My arms and legs started to go weak, and I started just tearing up. And luckily, if you've ever had someone just kind of lose themselves, there was a blackness in his eyes. And when he was over strangling me with a blackness in his eyes, and I'm struggling, I start to go limp, and then he just all of a sudden got off me and walked away. And thank goodness, because who knows what would have happened. But then, of course, he started crying, and then, let me cry for a few minutes. I curled up in a ball and just started crying and thought, what am I going to do? This is terrible. So very good salesman, as I always said to him, and he was able to talk me into going, because we had spent all this money, and he used the shame and guilt. All of your family came from Europe and all over the United States to come to this wedding. We just got married in a castle. We spent all of this money that he wanted to spend. I wanted a little beach wedding. He wanted the big fancy wedding. So we got what he wanted. And, all of these things, he used the money, used the guilt, used the shame, the embarrassment. My minister is the one who married us. So then that was a little addition to that. And he kept promising it's never going to happen again. I promise that we just need to stay married. If it ever happens again, I'll walk away, and I'm not going to give you a problem after I leave.
Wow.
And I said, yeah. And part of me was like, I really should just send a message to my, minister and say, just don't even send in the paperwork for this wedding. I mean, that's really how terrible it was. And I second guessed myself. And I said, you know what? I'm going to just do it. We're married. This is my husband. I need to suck it up. And again, because feeling like there was something broken in me. So we ended up going on the honeymoon. After a few days, I started to relax a little bit. And he was good for about 2 or 3 months. And then throwing furniture, being cursed at, harassing me, calling me names was one of his favorite things to do, but also physical violence. I mean, I was spit on more than a few times. I would lock myself in my room, and he would try to get into the room, broke the door, actually, would keep me from being able to get from one room to the other. He would just block the space. He'd wake me up in the middle of the night and tell me I needed to clean something at 3:00 in the morning. He would call the police and say that I had done something, and it would be 1:00 in the morning, and all of a sudden the police would be knocking at the door. I'd be sleeping. So that just kind of happened until one day I decided, hey, I was working a second job. He texted me, he quit his job. And then when I told him to get his job back, he cursed at me again and said, I never supported him. And I said, I'm done. whether I am by myself and alone is still going to be better than being with this person and feeling as alone as I feel. And so I can't say it got better magically. It actually got worse. I ended up getting all these health issues and had all these other big things come up for me. And then finally, about a year or two into it, all of a sudden I got that aha moment sitting in the emergency room with a sprained ankle. And I said, I got to fix this. The common denominator in all of this has been me. So that means there is something that I need to work on to stop attracting these people. And then that was where my journey of healing began. And now, lucky enough, I figured out what that is. And now I am lucky enough to get to help other people on their journey.
Wow, that's so loaded what you just said, because there's so much to break apart there too. Like when you were talking to someone else, that they still had their pain. They still needed healing to go through. And when you talk about it, it's almost of, hey, this happened. It's a matter of fact. This is what I went through. And I noticed that when someone has gone through their healing, they reach that level of, oh, yeah, he did this to me. He did that to me. Or she did this to me. She did that. And they talk about it as if it was just a part of their life. And this is their past. And they had to go through healing, as opposed to when you start talking about it, you start getting in your stuff. You start feeling really internal. You start feeling like, I still have some anger about this. I got to deal with this now. And, I wish that bastard was, 6 feet under. I mean, you have all these thoughts and feelings when you haven't fully healed from it. So let me ask you a question. You get strangled on your wedding night. So when's the first time you told that story to someone?
It's funny. The first time I think I completely told the full story was when I was interviewed for a podcast, actually. And one of my best friend is a psychiatrist, and we've been best friends since 7th grade. And I didn't really tell her everything. And whenever there is a fear of sharing with other people, I say it's when you feel shady. When you feel like you need to be shady and you can't share stuff about what's going on, that's a huge red flag. So my best friend's a psychiatrist. I'm being shady. I'm not telling her as much as I should have been. And she, I remember her saying that she listened to this podcast in her bathroom in tears, crying. She said, I didn't know that you were going through that. She says, and I'm sorry that I couldn't help you through that painful time. And I said, I didn't want you to know. I knew it was wrong. I was embarrassed. I was a strong, independent woman. And here I was married to someone who was making my life a living hell. I didn't want everyone to know that that's what I was going home to. Wow.
So when you shared that story on a podcast, were you able to talk about it like you are talking about it now? Had you done a lot of healing up to that?
Yeah. By the time I was ready to start sharing it, I definitely was ready. And I was ready too for the repercussions, because that's the thing too, is that you have to know that the person, when they hear their name being used, or, my ex, he knows who he is. So right away there was legal stuff immediately. He came after me, trying to get me to shut everything down and to just try to be in control again. And I was so past that at that point. I was ready for the pushback. So at that point, after I did the interview, I actually had so much great response to that I finally decided, you know what, I need to write a book. And of course that really brought it to another level, because that made him even more angry. I mean, and still to this day, I actually had co-signed on a student loan for him. And still to this day, we've been divorced since 2012. To this day, he has still not paid that student loan. And he has said to me that he will not, and he doesn't care that it's ruining my credit, because he's already been through bankruptcy and it doesn't matter to him. So that type of, and it, as much as it should probably bother me that it is affecting my credit, it's so childish and just such a good example of how much he still has not moved on. I'm not letting it hold me anywhere. Like it is, and I get my, I get to see my credit report, and I'm like, oh, yep, still there. Wow. But I'm not, the anger for me isn't there anymore. So it's been a long time that he's still holding on to it.
Would you say that the anger is not there anymore because you feel like you're out of a situation that was much greater pain or hurt or fear or whatever it was?
I'm so grateful. That's the biggest thing. I talking about emotion, I will get emotional and I feel it already coming on. I am so happy with where my life is that it would be hard to be more grateful for the life that I get to experience because I made that choice. I'm married to my best friend. We have 2 beautiful children. I have a 10-month-old little girl and a 3-year-old little boy. And I get to experience every single day with the people that I love the most and to just bring so much abundance into my life. And had I not gone through that pain and decided to leave, I would still be there. And luckily, we didn't have any children together, but what if we had? I would have brought children into that terribly abusive, unhealthy relationship. And I would have been living every day wishing that I wasn't waking up. I mean, and there's part of me that wonders if I would still be alive or if I would have become an alcoholic or started using drugs just to try to escape with what I was dealing with. So my life is so different. My husband now says, he said, I've heard your story and I know, he said, I just can't imagine that that's you because that's not the you that I know. He said, you would never let me speak to you even remotely like that. I said, heck no, no, I would not.
You've developed boundaries, and that's one of the things I wanted to bring up today is the idea of knowing who you are and standing up for what's right or for what's wrong. I mean, how do you actually define, is that what you're calling it, a personal boundary for yourself?
Yeah, a personal boundary. I remember when I started my divorce, I was 34 years old and I never knew what a boundary was. I remember going to therapy and my therapist was like, you need to work on boundaries. And I'm like, I don't understand what that means. And I really didn't. I was like, so I can tell someone what I need and let them know my expectation. And then I can remove myself if they can't follow through that expectation, or I can set a boundary for myself. Like, I will not allow people to curse at me. I will not allow people to put me in physical, danger, things like that. Those are my boundaries. Those are my personal boundaries. So when I learned what those were, I realized that I am not enmeshed with another person. I'm allowed to have that space. Like when we talk about personal space and in the States, it's 18 inches. It's kind of like arm length away. And, when you have boundaries, there are the verbal boundaries that you're giving to other people to let them know, hey, this is my arm's length away. This is what's comfortable for me and okay with me. And I'm going to let you know if it's not okay with me because we teach people how to treat us.
Yeah. And so somebody comes into your proximity. How do you respond then? Like you're in line at the grocery store, you're in line at the bank, and somebody's like right up to you or whatever the scenario.
It's really about knowing yourself. So when I start to feel that discomfort inside of my body, it might be in my chest or in my stomach or just this uneasy feeling, I'll just speak up. And I was actually talking to someone who is running a domestic violence awareness. And I was talking to her about domestic violence, and she was saying, hey, people don't really know how to heal themselves. And I said, well, you kind of have to be selfish in some ways. And so she said, well, selfish, that sounds like something that's negative. And I said, honestly, when you're healing, pendulum kind of starts to swing in the other way, where we are so often trained to be aware of everybody else, be careful of what, not offending other people and making sure that everybody else is comfortable. And as women in particular, I find that we've been trained really well in society to take care of everyone else but ourselves. So part of my healing was when people would say, hey, how are you today? The automatic normal response is to say, I'm fine. How are you? That's the automatic thing. And so for me, what I started to do was I started to say, when someone was asking me how I was doing, I would automatically just tell them and just spew it and just say, actually, it's really terrible today. This is going on. This is going on. And I would just say whatever I needed to say. And people would look at me like I had two heads, but it wasn't about them and it wasn't about their comfort. It was about finally sharing the stuff that I needed to share and letting people know where I was coming from. And even whatever needs I had, I would just say it. And then now I don't do that anymore. I got to the place where the pendulum swung the other direction. And now I'm at a place where I can say, hey, this person makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable. I'm going to remove myself. I don't necessarily need to tell them. There's certain things where I've learned what's comfortable for me and learned when to say something and when not to say something.
Well, it's interesting because I use that pendulum swing analogy a lot for certain things in life. For example, when I had low self-worth, I was in high school and I just let people pick on me and I was the biggest people pleaser and I didn't want anyone to be upset at me and I wanted everyone to like me. There was a lot of low self-worth inside me for me to look for that attention and for that validation from other people. And so that pendulum swing was all the way on this end. And then one day I got a muscle car. I was like 17 or 18 and my ego was like, wow, I feel really good. Everyone's looking at me. I owned it for like 6 or 9 months or something like that. And then I got rid of it. But what was interesting is that I went through a transformation process. It was really strange. It was like I inflated my ego for a little bit, bringing the pendulum back. and really felt good about myself. And I hadn't done that in a long time, if ever, feeling good about myself. And I was like, yeah, but you're not supposed to show off. You're not supposed to go out there and gloat and, brag about what you are and what you have and things like that. So it's a little narcissistic, you might think. So I've learned that it can be, and this is my own opinion, I don't know if you agree or not, it can be useful in a certain amount of control when you control this to swing the pendulum the other way and go, okay, what's the opposite of low self-worth? Well, it's high self-worth. Well, how can I feel high self-worth? I'm going to go show off. I just had an example on the episode I did the other day of how about if I just lift a couch and say, honey, look how strong I am. I'm lifting this couch. It feels pretty good. And that'll kind of get me out of that funky state. So I like that pendulum swing idea.
And just to add to, I think that it's so empowering to speak your truth. It takes away the power from someone else, the other people that might have been involved, and to not, again, have to hide it. So we're just putting it out there, and deciding what we're going to share with the world, and to stop playing small, because a lot of times the negative voice in our head is saying, nobody wants to hear what you have to say. And, it doesn't really matter. And who are you to think that other people need, whatever it is the doubter says in your mind. But to just speak your truth is very freeing. It's one of the most freeing experiences that I've had.
I agree with you. And I think what happens is the people that listen to this show, the people that come to you, I would imagine they are highly empathetic. And those highly empathetic people say, I don't want to put them down. I don't want to make them feel bad. So I won't tell them that I'm having a bad day.
Yep.
And so there's that people pleaser coming out, making sure we don't hurt other people's feelings. When you're asked today and you are having a bad day, do you just automatically just say, oh, no, I'm having a crappy day? Or is there some sort of buffer like, hey, you really want to hear what I'm going through today?
And I think that's really important because you want to be able to give people the chance to give back as well. When we are caretakers and we are empathic and we do all these things, we're so used to being, the one, hey, give it to me, I'll take care of it. But we're human beings. We have bad days too. So there are some times that we have to just put that phone down, not answer a call, or have our people that we reach out to. I mean, it was probably about 3 months ago, I had a day where just, my father had cancer. It looked like it was coming back. My sister had something weird going on with her. Anything that was weird and not great happened. It all happened in one day. And then my half sister calls me. She's like, oh, your mom, because it's, different moms. She's like, your mom, gave some creditors or some fake people all of her information. And so it was like, oh my God, I can't take anything else. I am to my level. So I put down my phone. I wasn't looking at anything on social media. And then luckily, I saw that my best friend was calling, and I was like, this is someone that I can talk to. Good. This is my go-to person. And I knew that she was not going to bring everything down. And so when I picked up the phone, I said, oh, it's you. She's like, I felt like you needed something. So then we were able to talk, and I was able to share and lighten my load with her. Had it been anybody else, I wasn't going to talk to anybody else. So to have that go-to person, to have that, someone that you can reach out to and give people the chance to help you instead of thinking that you need to handle it by yourself all the time.
Well, that also involves being vulnerable enough to tell your story without feeling like anything that guilt or shame, or, it's hard to stop those feelings. Like when you were in that relationship, when you were married, you didn't even tell your best friend, who was a psychiatrist, who probably could have said, this is what you can do. This is what you should do. And, but I'm sure there's a lot of people listening now that are in relationships as we speak, who are in a situation that, like you talk about getting out of victim mode. They're in a situation where they feel like there's nothing they can do. They're out of control. They have no options. And when you were married, you probably had very similar feelings. Because even though it was your choice to get married, that may have been a coerced choice, but even though you were in that marriage and you were going by that choice, by that commitment, and you were staying in that situation, how long were you married again?
5 years.
So you were married 5 years. There's a point where you said, like you had that sprained ankle, I think, and you're like, I got to stop this. But to get to that point, what does someone who may be not experiencing that level of aggression or violence have to do inside themselves in their life to reach that point where they say, I have to get out of this situation? Because a lot of people don't.
No.
They'll just keep going and going and going and say, well, I don't know what's on the other side of this. If I leave, I may not find somebody else. And they have all these excuses or reasons, and some maybe there could be legitimacy to some of these reasons, yet they're choosing to stay in a situation that clearly makes them unhappy day after day after day. So what do you suggest they start doing?
I mean, I've worked with women that were in their marriage for 27, 30 years, and they stayed exactly like that, and then they decided to leave. That fear is a huge reality, is what else is in there? What else is out there for me? Who am I without this relationship? What's it going to be like? Can I handle it on my own? And so often the person is so good at manipulating you to make you feel like you are not able. Some of the strongest, most independent people that I know have been in abusive relationships. So that's got to tell you something. Yeah. So these abusers, they like the strong, independent people, and then they like to tear them down because, like my ex would say, I want a strong, independent person, but because he was not strong and independent, instead of trying to work his way to where I was, he would try to bring me down to his level, which he would manage sometimes. I mean, sometimes I would definitely get there. But it's really about reconnecting to yourself and starting to realize that it's not you that's causing them to be this way. And to start looking at yourself from the outside and the inner child work, and to say, would you allow someone to speak to your 3-year-old the way that you are being spoken to? Are you, you're allowing someone to take your life? The biggest, most important thing we can give someone is our time. That we don't know how much time we have on this earth. So every moment that you're spending with this person who's bringing down your shine, who's bringing down your energy, you're allowing them to take that away from you and to say, hey, wait a minute, I deserve more. I was not put on this planet to suffer and spend my whole life wishing I was somewhere else or wondering what else is out there. You, wherever you are, whoever needs to hear this, you have something really magical inside of you that will be very difficult, if nearly impossible, for it to come out while you're playing small in this unhealthy relationship. You're never going to make them happy. You're never going to make them into the person you want them to be or you see the potential for them to be. They've shown you who they are. Believe them. And now it's time to take care of yourself.
Yeah, that's good. And I think it does come down to something you focus on a lot, which is knowing that you're important, that you're worthy, that you're significant, and understanding that this other person is trying to convince you that you're not. And they do such a good job of it. I mean, it's interesting because I come from sort of the other side. And I think we talked about this on your show last time, where when I was married, I had emotional abuse. I was going to say tendencies, but no, I was emotionally abusive in my relationship. I guilted her. I did the silent treatment to make her feel guilty, to make her feel like as long as she changes, then the relationship will be good. I did a lot of things I'm not happy about, I'm not proud of, but so grateful that she divorced me so I could find out this stuff. And this is one of the things I love to tell people is that I think a lot of emotional abuse victims, narcissistic abuse victims, they think they're hurting the other person. And they're so empathetic and so compassionate to the other person that they're with that's actually abusing them. And it's just a strange dynamic there. But
well, we enable them. Nothing changes unless something changes. And I actually just had this conversation with a client the other day. When someone is abusive towards you and you stay in the relationship, what you're saying to them is, it's okay that you are abusing me. You're not actually saying those words, but you are saying it to them. And then what happens to that person who's abusing you is they're saying to themselves, this person, this victim, doesn't hold themselves in high enough regard that they're allowing me to disrespect them. And then they respect you even less. And it becomes this vicious cycle. So you're thinking that you're coming from a place of, I'm helping them. I want them to be better. I know their possibility. And the other person is saying, hey, this person is weak. They're letting me walk all over them. I can do whatever I want to them, and they stick around. And it just gets worse and worse. And that's why the cycle will continue as long as you continue to be in it.
Well, the enablement is a huge part of it. And I think what ends up happening is that there are cases like you just said, like I can just walk all over you because you let me, and you're weak. And obviously if you're weak, I need to control you. And there might be that thought process going on. Because if nobody controls you, then you're going to be out of control and your life won't be in, the way you want it to be. In my relationship, it was more like, what you're doing is making me unhappy. Can't you see this? Can't you see that you're making me unhappy? This is your fault. In my case, it was her emotional eating. So she would turn to food instead of turn to me. Of course, I was a little emotionally dangerous back then. She would, gain weight, and I would fear that I'm just going to end up with some really, and this is my thoughts back then, not now, really big, fat, ugly woman that I would be unhappy with. And I had this fear inside of me that, great, I made this commitment. I better control this environment. I better control this relationship so that she conforms to the way I want her to be. And no matter what she did, no matter how much this is awful. Now I feel bad. I mean, I've always felt bad about this, but thinking about this now, no matter how much she cried, no matter how much she felt hurt, no matter how much she tried, she showed me so much unconditional love that I feel really bad. And for the first time after we separated, I was able to switch roles and imagine myself in her shoes and ask myself, would I want to be challenged at everything I eat? Would I want to get that look? Or what would I feel like if my partner was silent for 2 or 3 days? And I was trying to reach out for love and connection and just wanted to know if we're still a thing. And so I reversed those roles, and it really affected me. And I was like, wow, I'm just an awful person. And so I say this in a sense to help others out there that might be in a space that I was in or is in there now, to know that if you have empathy, you can change. You can put yourself in their shoes and realize, oh, this is what I'm doing. I better work on myself. But like you said, with the enablement, I can look back and see how often she let me get away with this crap. And she shouldn't have. She should have stood up and said, hey, look, you need to stop treating me this way. If you have a problem with it, that's your problem, not mine. If she said that, and I'm not blaming her at all for this, but if she had said that to me, it would have helped straighten me out, because I would have been like, oh crap, am I going to lose this relationship? Oh crap. And so I would have realized accountability there.
Yeah. And you're empathetic. I mean, you are someone that would be open to listening to that. A lot of people that are listening might need to remind themselves that if you're in a position where you're reminding or you're trying to tell someone your needs and they're not listening to it, you're not going to force them to listen to your needs. There's some people that are just not going to respect you no matter what you do. And part of that is, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if for you, it was part of what you learned. I mean, I have a 3-year-old, and I know how hard it is at 3 already, seeing how difficult it is to be a parent and try to give all the information that we need to give them, and how early it starts, where they need to be their own person, everything else. And so you read all these books, and, some parents think that they need to give them the silent treatment and ignore when there's someone, them doing a wrong thing. And, a lot of it's stuff that we learned from our parents, that unhealthy subconscious programming that we learned from our parents.
Well, you just said the key word, which is, and I said it earlier, empathy. If the person does not have empathy, I've seen this so much, where an empathetic person will be in a romantic relationship with an unempathetic person, or at least not the kind of empathy you're looking for. And the empathetic person will say and do things and wonder how the unempathetic person can't possibly see that they're hurting them. And it's not that they can't see it. It's just they don't understand it. They don't comprehend it. They can't see it. They don't see what they're doing to you. And then the victim or the emotional abuse sufferer is experiencing pain and then doesn't understand why the unempathetic person isn't empathetic and not stopping their behavior. But I see it over and over again. If you have someone who doesn't have empathy in your life, you're not going to get through to them the same way somebody might get through to you. You just can't convince them that your pain is important.
Yeah.
If you can't convince someone that your pain is important, then you might not be with someone that's going to be healthy.
Yeah, I agree. And I also wanted to add, too, because you brought up something that I think is so important, is even if you have 2 empathetic people. I mean, my husband and I were best friends. I can finish his sentence. He could finish mine. I mean, I've never been as close to anyone in my life, except for maybe my best friend. But other than my other best friend, my husband is my best friend. And there are times where I think the other one assumes that we knew what they were talking about, and we didn't. Yeah. So even in the healthiest relationships, a mind reading technique doesn't actually work. So we really need to make sure that we are also communicating our needs, wants, and desires with the person that we are in a relationship with. Because as soon as we start thinking that someone else just knows what you meant, or that you're feeling a certain way and they just know, what you did, that's going to end up as a argument and not a healthy situation.
Those are dangerous words. You know what you did to me.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Could you
good.
Please explain it a little bit more? So kind of in conclusion for what we're talking about today, I love the idea of accountability. When you were reaching the end of your marriage, I don't know if you got into a space of, if this ever happens again, I'm going to do this. Or like you said, maybe this is it. I've got to just plan my escape and get out of this situation. Was there ever a talk of accountability in your marriage? Did it ever go that way?
Yeah, I mean, we tried the therapy and I tried to explain it away and do all these things to try to have him follow through. He would start therapy on his own and then he'd stop going. And so there was all of that. And then even towards the end, before that final day, I did start actually preparing myself. So I had spoken to a domestic violence shelter. I got myself ready. I got all the T's crossed and the I's dotted and made sure that I was ready. I had an escape plan. I had money put to the side. So I had really tried every single thing with him to keep him accountable. And I have a background in psychology. I'm a crisis counselor. I mean, I had been doing that since way before I met him. So I had all the abilities and I knew. But when you're in it, sometimes it's hard to see it. So of course, when there was all the things that were going wrong in the marriage, I was trying to be almost like his therapist and say, have you tried this? Maybe you should do this. Let's figure out something together. And, I kept really trying to get him to see the error of his ways. But the reality is that wasn't my job. My job was to, be supportive and to help him as a wife, but not to try to fix it for him. And so once I removed myself from that scenario and started really focusing on my exit plan, then things got a little bit easier.
I see that a lot too with people trying to help out their partner. Yet, this is what the narcissist tries to do, is trying to help you out and make you change the way he believes or she believes that you should be.
Codependency is a little bit controlling.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to lie. I mean,
yeah.
we mean well, and we're coming from a place of love, but it's a controlling thing. I'm going to make you into the person that I want you to be, not the person that they're ready to be, but the person that I want. And that's not really healthy love. I mean, in my current relationship, I allow him to be. I mean, over the summer, I traveled all over the country without my husband. And he said, I knew that when I married you, I was never going to keep you, tied to one place. You were going to be active and bring the kids everywhere and do all those things. So he wasn't going to try to change me and who I was either. So that knowing and appreciating who the other person is, supporting them and letting them know, and, of course, having boundaries in the relationship as well, but, allowing them to be who they are and remember that you're there to support each other in each person being their own version of their best, not your version of their best.
Yeah, and you're probably preaching to the choir with this audience right now. So when you're in that relationship, back to the accountability real quick. I look at it this way: when someone is in a relationship like this, emotional abuse is happening, and they say, "Okay, how about this? I don't want you to do that again." They'll tell their partner. I mean, if that even comes up, if they even have the boundary within them to say that, "I don't want you to ever do that again. It hurts me," and whether they listen or not. My next question to a person in this situation is, well, what are you going to do if they do it again? Because this happens all the time.
Yeah.
I don't want you to do that. It hurts me. I mean, I'll share with my audience. You ask questions like, do you realize what you're doing is hurting me? I think it's a great question because once you find out the answer, it tells you a whole lot about the person.
Yeah, that's true.
Because I had somebody write to me and say, I asked that question. And he said, well, yes. and she said, well, then why are you doing it? And he said, well, because it's fun. And she said, I know. She said, I left the relationship. And that's all she needed to know. I think we sometimes fool ourselves thinking that it's going to get better, even though the trend line of happiness is going down and to the right. It's not happy anymore. It's not fun. It's emotionally abusive. And so we do have to ask these harder questions and get solid data of, do you realize when you do that, it hurts me? It makes me feel pain. And if they say no, then you can have a conversation about it. If they say yes, then there's might be a bigger decision to make there. So with the accountability factor, I look at, and you can tell me your thoughts on this, is it ever enough to say, okay, you know what? No sex for a month if this happens again. Or I'm going to be gone for a week if this happens again. is it ever enough? Will it ever, I mean, of course, it depends on the level of emotional abuse and how much the partner is willing to work on this stuff. Or is it more like, hey, you know what? I'm going to define a hard line in the sand here. This is my boundary. You cannot cross it. And if you do, XYZ will happen. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, for those types of really hard boundaries like that, I mean, I would assume if it's something like physical abuse, emotional abuse, and people will curse and scream at the other person and say, well, that's just how people fight. In a healthy relationship, that's not how healthy people fight. People talk about what's going on for them. So I would suggest knowing before you even get into a relationship, what are the values that are the most important to you? And then before you get into the relationship, what will I do if people cross those boundaries?
That's beautiful.
So if you know ahead of time, you know yourself well enough and you know who you are, which is why we always recommend, and I'm sure you do too, take some time in between relationships and get to know who you are so that you can figure out what those values are. So get to know what that is so that way you're already set up. You know, we always go to what's easiest. So, hey, I've already thought about this. He cheated on me or she cheated on me. They cursed at me. They, did this. What is it? And, right away, if someone calls you a bitch and you're in the relationship for 6 months, okay, well, that could be a hard, if you ever call me a bitch or you curse at me ever again, I am out. I don't care if we're married for 20 years. It doesn't matter to me. That for me is a hard no. You've already thought about it. You're very strict and precise with what's going to happen, no matter when that point is. And then so that way, if they do, you've already let them know. Then you have to follow through on it. But if you let them know, because sometimes at the beginning for them, maybe they said bitch before and it didn't matter to anybody, but it really matters to you. So now all of a sudden they've got their warning. They know what it is. That's a hard one, not allowed anymore. And now if they never do it again, then good. If they do, you know what to do ahead of time.
It reminds me of dog training a little bit.
Kind of is. We're all Pavlov's dogs.
Well, I do see it that way because dogs do like to push boundaries and find out how far they can go before they're disciplined, before they're told not to do something. And that's a whole nother subject. But I fully agree with that. I think when you do say, I mean, your values are the most important things to you. And if you say, well, this is what I value, and to yourself, this is what I value in a relationship. This is what I value in life. This is how I value people treating me. I value respect. I value honesty. I value loyalty. I'm fun. And if all of those values are being violated, you said the magic words, well, what are you going to do about it? And of course, now there are people listening that are in this situation, knowing their values are being violated. And, oh God, I see this over and over again. They get desensitized over time. Oh, yeah. And they look at their values differently, or they change their values. Or, I always look at the analogy of he yelled at me, but we made it through it. So at least he's not slapping me. Or she. This is all he or she.
Yeah.
He slapped me, but we made up for it, and he takes care of the kids. At least he's not kicking me while I'm down. Having an affair, exactly. And always we devalue our values over time until we've lost them. And then I hear it, and I'm sure you do all the time. I don't even remember what my values are. I don't remember who I was. I remember I used to be a strong, independent, happy person. And now I'm in this relationship, and I'm a shell of my former self. It's like those words are echoed over and over again.
Yeah. We're human beings are really good at adjusting to their surroundings. It's what makes us really amazing as a species and what makes us able to sustain life. But it's also not good when we're so used to our surroundings that we forget who we are. And when we know our values, we know what's important to us, that we're able to say when we're going to go. But also when you start saying, I'm losing myself, well, then what are you going to do when you start to have those feelings? A strong person whose self-esteem is in a healthy place is going to say, hey, I don't like this. I don't like the person that I'm becoming. I am going to remove myself. Where someone who maybe their self-esteem is not as strong, they'll see it. They'll see all these things happen. They're like, well, maybe, like for me, maybe I need to change myself. Maybe I need to work on myself. And that's just, again, what I said before, it's so important to know who you are. Because if you're constantly trying to people please everybody else, then you don't even know who that person is. So then it's hard to know where your boundaries, where you start and the other person ends, because you're just so used to people pleasing.
Yeah, you're so spot on, of course. And let me ask you one final two-part question with this. with emotional abusive relationships, the person that's in a relationship like that might be considering either leaving or not, working on the relationship or not. In your experience, when someone's in an emotionally abusive relationship and they think they might be able to work on it, what's the success rate of working on that?
I don't have an exact number, but I can tell you it is pretty low. Okay. And the only way realistically that it's going to work is if the other person, like maybe someone like you that's empathetic and willing to take responsibility for their behavior, then yes, if they're willing to say, hey, I'm wrong, I am going to go to therapy because I know that I need to do a lot of work. I was, had all these issues as a child and I never worked through them and I have anger, and they actually follow through with it and do really hard work and stick to it no matter what, then there is a chance. And even that's not 100%. But if you're saying to them, you'd better go to therapy, you'd better do this, and you're trying to give them all the ultimatums, then the chances are pretty good. They're going to tell you that they're working on it, and they're going to tell you what you want to hear, and then they're going to go right back to the way they were. And depending on your response is going to depend on what happens next. Because if they tell you all the things that you want to hear, and then they go back to it and you stay, you've just given them permission now to abuse you further.
Oh my God. Well, you just echoed my mantra that I did in my marriage, which was, I'm working on it. I used to say that a lot. I used to say, I'm working on it. I'm working on it. I know, I'm working on it. Yet in the back of my mind, or the front of my mind, actually, I still knew I was right. And that was the problem, is that, all right, you know what? I'll work on it. She wants me to work on it. And I'm into self-growth and self-help. And so I will work on this. Yet I still know I'm right, and she still needs to change. And so it was messed up. And this is how some people think. You just have to know this is how some people think, that they probably still believe they're right. And so, okay. And my second part of that question was, someone's in a relationship and they're considering their options. And let's just say, like you said, the chances of working through this, it depends if they're an empathetic person and they're willing to work on themselves. They're not the type of person that says, I will change for you. Instead, they're like, I need to change for me, regardless if this relationship works out or not. That's a very healthy statement. Let's just say that they're in this fearful place. Like, you reached that bottom line. You were like, that's it. I can't go any further with this. You reach the breakdown before the breakthrough. And not everyone is in that space, because it's always like on the edge. Is he or she really being mean, or is it just me misinterpreting it? They're not sure what to do with it, and they get confused, and there's gaslighting, and they're going crazy, and they're not sure what's happening. What is like you said, reconnect with yourself? Do you have any examples of that, or just a practice that someone can use? Or
Well, start figuring out what your passions are. One of the things I teach my clients in my 6-week healing group is, are you finding joy every day? Are you happy that you woke up today and that you get to breathe this air and see the beautiful sky and experience the conversations you have with different people and live the life that you love? Are you waking up every day feeling that lucky to be alive and to be here? And if the answer is no, most days, you're probably not in a relationship you should be staying in. And, sometimes it's a lot of work on you. No matter what, it's always a lot of work on you. And that's some of the things I think sometimes clients, and you probably notice this too, people get frustrated because it's hard and it gets harder before it gets easier. It's pushing through that pain. And I say to my clients all the time, sometimes you have to be ready to break your own heart in order to get to the other side. So you have to know that it's going to be difficult. But if you're feeling most days that there is no joy and that you don't know what your passions are, then that's a good sign. So rediscovering your passions, figuring out what makes you tick, what makes you excited, what brings joy to your life, reconnecting with other people and having connections. I mean, so many people that I talk to, that's actually why I'm doing a women's empowerment retreat in February to Costa Rica, because so many women say, I don't even have a friend. I don't have anyone I can even call. I don't have that go-to call person. I've lost everybody along the way trying to please this other person. So, really reaching out. And that's kind of what I started to do. I reconnect, like high school friends, I called them up and said, hey, do you want to start doing a girls' night? And, those kinds of little things became big things over time. And I'm going to add too, if you're not sure if it's healthy or not, then reach out to your local domestic violence shelter and say, hey, this is what's going on, and I'm feeling confused, and I don't really know what's healthy anymore, and I don't really know what's happening, and talk with them. I mean, there's 1-800-Lifeline that's just a regular hotline. I mean, there's all these other hotlines that are there for free to be at your disposal. So if you're ever confused, then that would be a great outlet to go to start off.
That's a good ad. And there's some people I know that are saying, I'm not in an abusive situation. I'm not in a violent situation. I'm not going to call a domestic violence hotline. I don't need all these things. And I could see you shaking your head. We're on video on this other side of the world here. So I think there's a certain level of vulnerability that when you call these lines, that you feel like you're admitting to yourself that you actually are going through something that impactful.
Yeah. And when I finally spoke to someone at the local domestic violence hotline, and they had someone come with me to the police precinct to write a report so I could actually bring it to the court to get an order of protection. And this woman sat with me and she said, let's write this together. Tell me the things that happened. And so I told her the story of getting strangled on my wedding night, and she stopped and looked at me.
Boy.
And she was in shock. And I said, what? Why are you looking at me like that? And she said, he strangled you. Do you realize how quickly he could have killed you? And it was the first time that there was like that moment in my head where I thought, oh, wow, that's right. Because I had minimized that. He didn't punch me. Yeah. I never had a broken bone. I never had a black eye. Yeah, he spit on me a few times. Yeah, he pushed me. Yeah, he strangled me twice. I mean, yeah, those things happen. But for some reason, he wasn't beating the crap out of me. And that's what I thought a domestic violence hotline was for. And so, for anyone, again, who's listening and saying, well, he's not doing anything like that, but he's calling me a whore, or he is, all these things that are words meant to scare you or meant to intimidate you, those kinds of words, that's actually violence. That is violence. It's emotional, and it's still considered abuse. And if you are not sure, go on the internet and look at all the different types of abuse. There's sexual abuse, there's emotional abuse, there's financial abuse. There's the list of abuse is not just the physical part. And a lot of us are taught what the physical one is, but even that, because when we're in it, we're trying to survive, we minimize what we're going through because it's survival mode for us.
My mom told me a story of my stepfather throwing a hammer at her head.
Oh, gosh.
And I was like, what? And I never heard this story. And she goes, I heard it go by. It was that close. I was like,
oh, gosh.
Mom, you could have been dead if he hit your head.
Yes.
And she's like, I know. But the way she minimized that story and so many other things that had happened, because they were married for like 40 plus years.
Wow.
But it just shocked me. What? This happened? And, knowing all of the stuff that you and I know and a lot of other people know out there about emotional abuse, about physical abuse, and all the kinds of abuse that you just mentioned. Mm-hmm. Boy, if we saw that happening today with our parents, the kind of thing that we could help them, there's all kinds of ways we can spread this message. And I want people to visit your website and your Facebook group, I believe. You got a lot of things going over there. I know you have a YouTube channel. You wrote a book called Being Loved Shouldn't Hurt.
Yep.
I love that title. It is absolutely 100% true. And if anyone listening likes what I teach here, you're going to love what Stephanie teaches too. It's a lot of the same stuff and a lot of her own spin and you work mainly with women.
Yeah, there's men in the group, but it's mostly women.
Okay, so when you hear Stephanie and I talking about her and her and her and this and she, it's because Stephanie works mainly with women. And but of course, this applies across the board to anyone dealing with emotional abuse or any kind of abuse. Emotional abuse is usually a part of all these other types of abuse as well. And your website is beinglovedshouldn'thurt.com.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You have a Facebook page.
Yes.
Called Being Loved Shouldn't Hurt. Mm-hmm. I imagine I'll find YouTube Being Loved Shouldn't Hurt.
Mm-hmm. And my podcast is also Being Loved Shouldn't Hurt. And then I just like to throw a wrench in it. And I have a private group that's called Codependency and Healing Support Group. And that has a huge following as well.
And they can get to that how? Through your Facebook group?
if you go to my business page, Being Loved Shouldn't Hurt, you can just click. There's a button there that says join the private group, and you can click on it right from there.
I encourage anyone listening to, check out your book, Being Loved Shouldn't Hurt. Go to your website, beinglovedshouldn'thurt.com. And thank you, Stephanie, for joining me today, talking about this very important subject matter. I am so grateful that you are here, alive and well, to share your message, to share your story. It's obvious you've gone through not only a lot of pain, but a lot of healing. And I think healing is the main component of getting to this place that you're in today. You feel good. Your life is better. And there's so many people right now that are listening that are saying, that'll never be me. I can't ever see myself in that position. It's too late for me. I'm too old. I'll never have anyone else in my life. And there's all these stories that we tell ourselves that are usually drilled into us from someone else. They're usually false. So, Stephanie, any final words for anyone listening that might be in a situation that makes them not so happy?
From what you just said with that, I was one of those people who thought that maybe healthy love was not for someone like me. And that's what kept me trapped, as I thought I saw all these other people that were in healthy relationships, and I saw other people that were in unhealthy relationships, and they were there. They were living their lives. And I thought, I'm just one of those people that I'm just never going to have a healthy relationship. This is the best that's ever going to happen to me. And that negative thinking is why I stayed for so long. And I can tell you from the other side, I am someone who's able to have healthy relationships. But I had to do the right work on myself, and you can get there too.
Excellent. And just a quick final question. After you got out of your relationship, I'm just curious about the amount of time it took for the fog to clear out of your head so that you can actually see positive future for yourself.
Well, it was 2 years, and then 3. It was 3 years where I started being more serious with dating and just starting to say, hey, I might not ever find anyone, and that's okay. But I'm ready to start just kind of dating and seeing what's out there. So it was about 3 years.
Excellent. The reason I ask that is because a lot of people get out of these relationships thinking that they're not going to be happy, they're not going to find anyone else, and maybe they should go back to the relationship. I know you didn't want to. It was different.
Don't do that.
It was a different scenario for you. But there's a lot of people coming out of these relationships that aren't necessarily so convinced that they shouldn't go back. And I always say, give it 2 months. Give it 2 months of being away from the person, being in your own space before you make any decisions that will affect you going back or not.
Yeah, let the fog clear, and honestly, hire Paul, hire myself, hire a coach that you feel comfortable with to help you get through the detox, because that's what it is. That's why we keep going back. They're our drug. We are so used to the drama. We are so used to that drug, that back and forth. They don't love me if they don't come after me. And with that back and forth, if you have that coach set up and you're prepared, then you'll be able to stick to your plan, because if not, it's very easy to go back to what you know.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much for your time today, Stephanie. I appreciate you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for joining me today. If this is your first time listening, I don't normally have interviews on this show, so it's a little departure. But continue listening, because there's so much more coming that I want to talk about, and it's all about helping you become independent in yourself. You can be interdependent with someone else. And I look at that as you are independent, they are independent, and you work together in a partnership. This is definitely possible and can be very beneficial to both of you and create a lot of happiness and create a lot of synergy. So continue listening to this show. Continue learning as much as you can about any situation you're in, anyone that you have to deal with. We use those words, deal with. I have to deal with this person. I have to deal with this behavior. Continue learning as much as you can, because it's all about how much knowledge you have that's going to help carry you forward into healthier relationships, better communication, and an overall improvement in your well-being. And those you love as well. Because sometimes the people we love, they can bring toxicity into our life. They can bring toxicity into their own life. And we do want the best for most of these people. I say most, sometimes we don't, but we want the best for most of these people because we're in relationships with them in some way, or we have connections to them in some way. And so the best for someone else might be something that we mentioned in this episode, which is to stop being the person that allows someone else's bad behavior. Because if you stop allowing it, they're either going to stop doing it or they'll get worse. That's not much of a choice, I know, but if they get worse, then it might be enough motivation for you to finally put your foot down, if not for them, for you. And of course, I want to let you know, I'm not here to say you need to break up with someone or you need to get them out of your life. This show is all about you. It's all about increasing your mental and emotional strength so that you have a choice in what you want in your life. When you have a choice, you have options. You can show people the line and tell them not to cross it. And when they do, the accountability sets in and you aren't afraid to enforce it. So glad you're here listening. I appreciate you. Share this with others that might benefit. Love and Abuse is the official podcast of the Mean Workbook, an assessment and healing guide for difficult relationships. If you want to pinpoint the exact behaviors causing the difficulties in your relationship, including identifying all the signs of possible emotional abuse, not only do I want you to keep listening to this show, but head over to loveandabuse.com and check out the Mean Workbook. This show exists to remind you that you are not alone and you're not going crazy. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. You deserve honesty and sincerity. You deserve to be treated as worthy and significant. Because you are. Thank you for joining me today. We'll talk again soon.